Some places do not forget, some voices never die, and some legends are not legends at all. They are warnings dressed in folklore whispered through generations until the truth becomes too heavy to carry. I learned this the hard way in Adams, Tennessee, where the Bell Witch still waits in the shadows of an old cabin, calling names into the dark. My name was one of them. I am Adam, I am 27 years old, and I should have listened to the warnings. The drive into Adams, Tennessee felt like driving backward through time itself. What started as a smooth interstate highway gradually dissolved into smaller and smaller roads, each one seeming to shed another layer of the modern world. First, the 4-lane highway became 2 lanes. Then the chain restaurants and gas stations disappeared. Then the pavement itself seemed to age, cracking and weathering until finally it gave way to gravel that crunched beneath my tires like brittle bones. My GPS had given up the fight about 15 miles back, the screen frozen on a blank map with a single blinking dot that no longer knew where it was. I was navigating now by a hand-drawn map I had printed from an obscure paranormal investigation forum, the kind of website that looks like it was designed in 1998 and never updated. The map was crude, just a few lines representing roads, some landmarks that may or may not still exist, and an X marked deep in the woods labeled simply, Bell Site, do not enter after dark. That last part should have been my first warning, but I had come too far to turn back now. Adams is not the kind of town you stumble upon by accident. It is the kind of place that seems to actively hide from the world, tucked away in Robertson County, Tennessee, like a secret the locals agreed long ago to keep. Population barely over 600 souls, though I suspected the actual number was lower. No chain restaurants, no shopping centers, no traffic lights, just a collection of tired wooden buildings that looked like they had been standing since before the Civil War. A single gas station with pumps that still had analog counters, and an overwhelming sense that everyone here knew something you did not. The sun was already beginning its descent behind the rolling hills when I pulled into the gravel parking lot of a small general store. The building was weathered gray wood with a faded Coca-Cola sign hanging above the door, the kind of place that probably looked exactly the same in 1950 as it did now. A bell chimed as I pushed through the door, and the 3 people inside, 2 older men leaning against the counter in conversation and an elderly woman restocking shelves with trembling hands, all turned to look at me with the kind of slow, deliberate attention that makes your skin prickle. The silence was immediate and absolute. Even the ancient refrigerators in the back seemed to stop humming. The shopkeeper was a man in his 70s, lean and weathered like old leather, with eyes that were a startling pale blue against his tanned face. Those eyes measured me from head to toe before I even reached the counter, taking in my hiking boots, my backpack, my digital camera hanging around my neck. He knew what I was before I opened my mouth. "Afternoon," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering if you could help me with directions." He did not respond immediately. He just kept staring at me with those unsettling pale eyes. Finally, he straightened up and folded his arms across his chest. "You are not from around here." It was not a question. "No, sir," I admitted. "I am from Virginia. I am researching American folklore and historical hauntings. I heard the original Bell cabin is still standing on private land somewhere near the cave. I was hoping you could point me in the right direction." The 2 men at the counter exchanged a glance. The woman behind me stopped pretending to organize the shelves and just stood there, listening.
"It is," the shopkeeper said flatly.
I waited for him to continue. He did not. "Can you tell me how to get there?" I asked. He leaned forward on his elbows, bringing his face closer to mine. "I can, but I will not." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because you are asking the wrong question, son," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been genuine concern or might have been warning. "You should be asking if you should go there, and the answer to that question is no, absolutely not." I had expected this kind of response. Small towns near famous hauntings are always protective of their legends, either out of respect for the history, out of genuine fear, or because they have learned through hard experience that some things are better left alone. I had encountered it before, in Gettysburg and Salem in the catacombs beneath Savannah. The locals always warned you away. It was practically tradition. I pulled out a $20 bill and set it on the counter between us. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I have driven 8 hours to get here, and I have been researching the Bell Witch case for over a year." I am going either way. I would just really appreciate a little help finding the place. He looked at the money like it was contaminated, like I had just offered him blood money for leading a man to his death. He did not touch it. Instead, he sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of having seen this exact scene play out too many times before, and pulled a napkin from beneath the register. He uncapped a ballpoint pen and began to draw a crude map on the napkin. Lines for roads, an X for where we were standing, another X deep in what he drew as a dense cluster of trees. "Follow Old Highway 41 north for about 3 miles, he said as he drew. "You will see a dirt road on the left. There is no sign. There used to be, but someone tore it down years ago, probably for good reason. Follow that road until it ends. Then you walk. The path is overgrown, but it is still there. You will know when you are getting close." "How will I know?" I asked. He stopped drawing and looked up at me. "You will feel it." The way he said it made the temperature in the room seem to drop 5 degrees. I took the napkin and folded it carefully. "Thank you. I really appreciate this." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me before I reached the door. "Do not stay after dark." I looked back. His expression had not changed, still that same weathered, neutral mask, but his eyes were different now. There was something in them that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Why not?" I asked. "Because she does not like visitors," he said simply, "and she has a way of making sure they remember her. Some folks who went out there came back different. Some did not come back at all." One of the men at the counter spoke up for the first time. "My uncle went out there in 1973. Spent one night. Came back and would not talk about it, not ever. Refused to go back, refused to even drive down that road. He died 2 years ago, and on his deathbed he finally said something. I waited. He said he heard his name called from the woods every night since he left that cabin. Every single night for 40 years. Said it was her voice. Said she never let him forget." The shopkeeper nodded slowly. "That is why we do not go there. That is why the land has never been developed, even though it has been sold 3 times in the last 30 years. That is why no one from Adams will set foot on that property after the sun goes down." I tried to smile, tried to project confidence I did not entirely feel. "I will be fine. I have done this kind of thing before." The shopkeeper shook his head slowly. "Not like this, you have not." I thanked them again and left. As the door closed behind me, I heard the old woman speak for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "She is going to take that boy." The dirt road the shopkeeper had described was exactly where he said it would be. An unmarked turnoff on the left side of Old Highway 41, so overgrown with weeds and brush that I almost missed it even though I was looking for it. The entrance was barely wide enough for my car, and branches immediately began scraping against both sides as I eased forward. The road, if you could even call it that, was rutted and uneven, forcing me to slow to a crawl. Thick forest pressed in from both sides, the canopy overhead so dense that even though it was only 6:30 in the evening, it felt like twilight. The late October sun filtered through the leaves in fractured beams of gold and deep amber, creating pools of light and shadow that seemed to shift and move as I drove past. I had driven about a mile when the road simply ended. Not gradually, just ended. One moment there was a path ahead, and the next there was nothing but forest. I parked in a small clearing where several other vehicles had obviously turned around before me. The tire tracks in the mud were old, faded by rain and time. I sat in the car for a moment, engine idling, looking at the wall of trees ahead. This was it. The point of no return. I could still turn around. I could drive back to the general store, thank the shopkeeper for his concern, find a motel in Nashville, and forget this whole thing. But I did not come all this way to turn back now. I killed the engine and got out. The silence hit me immediately. It was not the peaceful silence of nature, it was something else. Something heavier. The kind of silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums, like the air itself is holding its breath. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence, deep and absolute. I opened my trunk and pulled out my backpack, checking the contents one more time. Flashlight with extra batteries, digital voice recorder, handheld video camera, motion-activated trail camera, notebook and pens, bottle of water, energy bars, a first aid kit I hoped I would not need, and my cell phone, which I checked and confirmed had 0 bars of signal. I was completely alone out here. I shouldered the backpack, locked the car, and started walking. The trail the shopkeeper mentioned was indeed still there, though barely. It was more of a suggestion than an actual path, a slightly thinner area of undergrowth where feet had passed often enough over the years to keep the forest from completely reclaiming it. Roots crossed the path like tripwires. Vines hung down from the canopy above, brushing against my face and shoulders as I pushed through. Every step I took crunched over dead leaves and brittle twigs, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I had been walking for about 10 minutes when I noticed the trees were different here. Older, thicker. Their bark was dark and rough, almost black in the fading light, and many of them were twisted in ways that seemed unnatural, growing at odd angles as if trying to lean away from something. And then I felt it. The shopkeeper was right. You did not need a map or a marker to know when you were getting close. You felt it in your bones, in your chest, in the sudden tightness in your throat. The air changed. It grew heavier, colder, thick with something I could not name but could definitely feel. It was like walking into a room where something terrible had happened, where violence or death had left a stain on the atmosphere that never quite faded. I pushed through a final curtain of hanging vines, and there it was. The cabin. It stood in a small clearing that felt like a wound in the forest, a place where the trees had given up trying to grow. The grass was dead and yellow, the ground uneven with rocks and roots. And in the center of it all, the cabin waited. It was smaller than I had imagined, single story with a sagging roof that somehow had not collapsed despite decades of neglect. The wood was dark with age and rot, the walls warped and leaning slightly to the left. The windows were empty, just black squares that stared out at nothing like hollow eye sockets. A stone chimney rose from one side, cracked and crumbling but still standing. And on the porch, the covered porch that ran along the front of the cabin, sat an old rocking chair. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and just stared. The chair was wooden, ancient, its varnish long since flaked away to reveal gray weathered wood beneath. It faced outward, toward the forest, as if someone had sat there watching the trees for so long they became part of the landscape. Dust covered the seat, but not evenly. There were streaks in the dust, patterns that looked disturbingly like they had been made by fabric, by someone sitting there recently. But that was impossible. No one came here. The locals had made that abundantly clear. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move forward. My boots crunched over the brittle grass as I approached the cabin, each step echoing in the stillness. The closer I got, the more details emerged from the gloom. Initials carved into the wooden posts of the porch, some old and deep, some newer and shallow, scraped into the wood with knives or keys. A rusted lantern hanging from a hook beside the door, its glass cracked and clouded with age. And everywhere, the sense of being watched. The door was ajar, not wide open, but open just enough to be an invitation, or a warning. I pushed it with my fingertips and it groaned on its hinges, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. The interior was dim, lit only by the dying light filtering through the empty windows. Dust floated in the air, visible in the beams of light, moving in slow, lazy spirals like snow falling underwater. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, each step announcing my presence to whatever might be listening. The smell hit me immediately. Mildew and rot, yes, but something else underneath. Something faintly metallic and organic, like old blood or rust or meat left too long in the heat. The main room was surprisingly intact. There was a stone fireplace against the far wall, blackened with soot, the mantel still holding a few objects. A chipped ceramic bowl, a rusted tin cup, a frame with no picture. A wooden table stood in the center of the room, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. And in the corner, on a simple wooden chair, an old Bible lay open. My eyes went to it immediately. The Bible. It was exactly as the legends described, open to Psalm 109, the Psalm of Curses. Even from across the room I could see the underlined passages, the faded ink marking verses of vengeance and death. I crossed the room slowly, my footsteps echoing, and looked down at the page. Let his days be few, and let another take his office. Let his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. Let his children be continually vagabonds and beg. Let them seek their bread also out of their desolate places. The verses went on, each one darker than the last, calling down destruction and ruin on the cursed. And in the margins, written in shaky handwriting with fresh ink that could not be more than a few months old, someone had written a single sentence. She still speaks. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I set my backpack on the table, the sound of it hitting the wood surprisingly loud, and pulled out my equipment. I checked my watch. 7:14 p.m. The sun would be down completely in another 30 minutes. I needed to set up before darkness fell. I placed my voice recorder on the table and hit record. This is Adam. It is 7:14 p.m. on October 19th. I am inside what is believed to be the original Bell cabin in Adams, Tennessee. The structure is still standing, though heavily decayed. There is an open Bible in the corner, open to Psalm 109, the Psalm of Curses. The air feels wrong, heavy, oppressive. I plan to stay here overnight and document any unusual activity. I set up the motion-activated trail camera on the mantel, angled toward the door and the porch beyond. Through the open door, I could see the rocking chair, still and silent in the growing darkness. I set up my handheld video camera on the table, making sure it had a full battery and clear view of the entire room. And then, with everything in place, I sat down at the table and pulled out my notebook. It was time to review what I knew. Time to remind myself of the rules. I had spent over a year researching the Bell Witch before coming here. It started as casual curiosity, a mention in a book about American folklore, but it quickly became an obsession. The more I read, the more I realized this was not just another ghost story. This was different. This was documented. The Bell Witch haunting is one of the most well-documented paranormal cases in American history. It is the only case where a spirit is believed to have directly caused a human death. It is the only haunting that was investigated by a future United States president. And unlike the vast majority of ghost stories that rely on folklore and secondhand accounts, the Bell Witch haunting has primary sources: letters, journal entries, sworn affidavits from witnesses. The story begins in 1817, when John Bell, a prosperous farmer and respected member of the Red River community in Robertson County, Tennessee, began experiencing strange phenomena on his property. It started small: odd noises in the night, scratching sounds in the walls, stones thrown at the house from no visible source. The family dog would bark at nothing, staring at empty corners with its hackles raised and teeth bared. The farm animals began behaving strangely: horses refusing to enter certain fields, cows producing less milk, chickens abandoning their nests. John Bell tried to keep it quiet at first. He was a rational man, a pillar of the community, and he did not want people thinking he had lost his mind. But the phenomena escalated. The noises grew louder. Objects began moving on their own. Blankets were ripped off beds in the middle of the night. And then came the physical attacks. It focused primarily on John Bell and his youngest daughter, Betsy. John would be struck by invisible hands, slapped and beaten with no one near him. Betsy had her hair pulled so hard that witnesses could see her head being jerked backward by nothing. She would be slapped in the face repeatedly, the handprints visible on her cheeks while she screamed and begged for it to stop. And then it began to speak. At first it was just whispers, faint, indistinct, coming from the walls. But the voice grew stronger. It progressed from whispers to words, from words to sentences, from sentences to full conversations. And what it said was impossible. The voice called itself Kate. Sometimes it claimed to be the spirit of a witch buried nearby. Sometimes it claimed to be multiple spirits, a family of entities who had taken up residence in the Bell home. It spoke with perfect diction and an extensive vocabulary. It knew things it should not have known, secrets whispered in private, events happening miles away, intimate details of the lives of everyone in the community. Word spread. Neighbors came to witness it. Ministers came to perform exorcisms. Doctors came to find rational explanations. And every single one of them left convinced that something impossible was happening in the Bell home. In 1819, Andrew Jackson, then a major general and not yet president, heard about the haunting. Jackson was a friend of John Bell and had fought with Bell in the Creek War. He was also a man who did not believe in ghost stories. He decided to visit the Bell farm to see for himself. According to multiple accounts, Jackson arrived with a wagon full of men and supplies, intending to stay several days and solve the mystery. As they approached the Bell property, the wagon suddenly stopped. The horses strained and pulled, but the wheels would not turn. The men got out and checked. There was nothing blocking the wagon, nothing wrong with the wheels. But no matter how hard they tried, the wagon would not move. Then a voice came from the air around them, a woman's voice, clear and mocking. "All right, General. Let the wagon move. I will see you tonight." The wagon immediately lurched forward. The horses bolted. And Jackson, despite his reputation for fearlessness, is reported to have said, "I would rather fight the British at New Orleans again than deal with the Bell Witch." He and his men stayed one night. Only one night. Whatever happened during those dark hours was never fully recorded, but Jackson left at first light and never spoke of it in detail again. The haunting continued for years. Kate's hatred for John Bell was absolute and unwavering. She promised repeatedly that she would kill him, that she would see him dead before she left. In October 1820, John Bell fell ill. His symptoms were strange. His tongue would swell, making it difficult to speak or eat. He suffered seizures. He grew weaker by the day. The doctors could find no cause and no cure. On December 19, 1820, John Bell died. The morning after his death, his son found a small vial of dark liquid in the medicine cabinet, a vial that had not been there before. They tested it on the family cat. The cat died within minutes, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. As they stared in horror at the dead cat, Kate's voice rang through the house, laughing. "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Bell's death was ruled natural causes, but everyone who had witnessed the haunting knew the truth. The Bell Witch had murdered him. After John Bell's funeral, the activity decreased dramatically. Kate announced that she would leave for 7 years and then return. True to her word, in 1828 she returned briefly, speaking with family members and making predictions about the future, predictions that reportedly came true. Then she left again, promising to return once more in 1935. Some say she never came back after 1935. Others say she never left at all. The property changed hands many times over the decades. The original Bell house was torn down, but the cave remained. And the cabin, the small cabin where hired hands had once lived, where Kate's voice had been heard most often, that cabin was left standing. And it is still here. I sat at the table in that cabin, surrounded by darkness now, the sun fully set beyond the windows, and I reviewed the rules I had compiled from my research. These were not casual warnings. These were survival instructions, passed down through generations of people who had learned through hard experience what happened when you ignored them. I wrote them in my notebook, my handwriting shaky in the beam of my flashlight. Rule 1. Never answer when you hear your name whispered in the dark, no matter how familiar the voice sounds. Rule 2. If the rocking chair moves on its own, do not touch it or try to stop it. Rule 3. Do not read aloud from any open Bible found in the cabin after sunset. Rule 4. If you hear laughter coming from beneath the floorboards, leave immediately and do not look back. I stared at those rules for a long time, my flashlight beam steady on the page. They felt less like folklore and more like the warnings you find on hazardous materials, rules that exist because people died learning them. Outside, complete darkness had fallen. The forest was silent. The cabin was silent. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I checked my watch, 8:42 p.m., and then I heard the first sound. The sound came from the back room, the small room behind me that I had glanced into when I first arrived but had not fully explored. It was a single footstep, clear, distinct, the creak of a floorboard under weight. I froze, my hand hovering over my flashlight. The cabin was old. Old buildings make noise. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. Animals might be nesting in the walls. There were a dozen rational explanations, but none of them felt right. I sat completely still, listening. 30 seconds passed. A minute, nothing. Just when I was starting to convince myself it was nothing, I heard it again. Another footstep. Closer. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, and turned toward the doorway to the back room. It was completely dark back there, my flashlight beam not quite reaching far enough to penetrate the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the stillness. Nothing. I picked up my flashlight and approached the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest. I could feel adrenaline flooding my system, that primal part of my brain screaming at me to run, to get out, to flee into the forest and not stop until I reached my car. But I did not run. I stepped into the doorway and swept my flashlight beam across the back room. It was empty. Just bare wooden walls, a broken bed frame in the corner, and a pile of old newspapers stacked against the far wall. No one was there. Nothing was there. But the air in that room was different. It was colder, significantly colder. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I stepped fully into the room, and that is when I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting wildly through the darkness. The main room was empty. The door to the outside was still open, showing nothing but darkness beyond. But I had heard it. I was certain I had heard it. I backed out of the room and returned to the table, my skin crawling. I sat down and checked the voice recorder. The red light was still blinking steadily. I rewound the last 30 seconds and played it back, static, just static. And then beneath the static, so faint I almost missed it, a voice, Adam. My blood turned to ice. I stopped the playback and stared at the recorder. Then I played it again, turning the volume up to maximum. Adam. It was my name. My name spoken by a voice I did not recognize. Soft, feminine, clear despite the static. A voice that should not exist on that recording. I had used this equipment dozens of times. I knew how it worked. I knew what normal interference sounded like, what radio bleed-through sounded like, what audio artifacts sounded like. This was none of those things. This was a voice, speaking my name. I set the recorder down with trembling hands and checked my video camera. It was still recording, the red light blinking steadily. I left it running and stood up, moving to the window. Outside, the forest was absolute darkness. No moon tonight. No stars visible through the canopy. Just blackness, complete and total. And then I heard it again, not on the recorder this time. In real time, Adam, a whisper just outside the window. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the reflection from my flashlight. I could not see anything. Just darkness. Adam, closer now. Right outside the window, as if someone was standing just on the other side of the glass, their mouth inches from my ear. Every instinct I had screamed at me to answer, to respond, to say something. It is human nature. When someone calls your name, you answer. But I did not. Rule 1. Never answer when you hear your name whispered in the dark, no matter how familiar the voice sounds. I stepped back from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. I could feel panic clawing at the edges of my mind, threatening to overwhelm rational thought. The whisper came again, but this time it was not from the window. It was from the door. Adam. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam illuminating the open doorway. The porch beyond was empty. The rocking chair sat motionless in the darkness. Adam. From the back room now. Adam. From the corner near the fireplace. Adam. From directly behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam sweeping across empty space. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, a rapid drumbeat of pure terror. And then as suddenly as it started, the whisper stopped. Complete silence fell over the cabin. I stood there in the center of the room, flashlight gripped in white-knuckled hands, breathing hard, listening. Nothing. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The silence was somehow worse than the whispers. At least with the whispers I knew where the threat was. Now I knew nothing. I checked my watch. 9:23 p.m. I forced myself to sit back down at the table. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think rationally. I was here to document this, to experience it, to gather evidence. This was what I came for, but knowing that and controlling my fear were two very different things. I checked my phone, hoping against hope that I might have signal. Nothing, not even a single bar. I was completely cut off from the outside world. I picked up the voice recorder and rewound it, playing back the last few minutes. Static. Footsteps. My footsteps. My voice calling out, "Hello?" And then clear as day. Multiple whispers overlapping each other, speaking my name in a chorus of voices that sounded nothing like the first voice I had heard. Hey. Adam, 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 Adam. Over and over, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all whispering my name simultaneously. I stopped the playback, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the recorder. That is when I noticed the Bible. It had moved. When I first entered the cabin, the Bible had been on the chair in the corner, open to Psalm 109. Now it was on the table, right next to my backpack. Still open to the same page, but I had not moved it. I had not touched it. I stared at it, my mind racing. Could I have moved it without realizing? Could I have been so distracted by setting up my equipment that I picked it up and placed it here without remembering? No, that was impossible. I would remember moving a Bible that was part of the legend itself, which meant something else had moved it. I leaned closer, examining the page. The underlined verses were still there. The marginal note, "She still speaks," I was still there. But now there was something else. Fresh ink, new words, written in the same shaky handwriting directly beneath the first message. "He will not leave." My throat went dry. That was not there before. I would have seen it. I had examined this Bible carefully when I first arrived. Someone or something had written those words while I was in the back room. While I was distracted, while I was alone. Or thought I was alone. I pushed away from the table, my chair scraping loudly, and stood up. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. I walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cold and still. No breeze, no sound. Just oppressive darkness and silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. I turned to go back inside. That is when I saw the rocking chair. It was moving. Before we continue, I want to pause for just a moment. If you are enjoying this story, if you are feeling that tension, that fear building in your chest, please take a second to hit that like button. And subscribe if you have not already, because trust me, this night is just getting started, and you are going to want to see what happens next. Now back to the cabin. The rocking chair moved slowly. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm was steady, measured as if someone was sitting in it, gently pushing with their feet. But the chair was empty. I could see clearly through the slats of the back, through the armrests. There was no one there, but it was rocking. Rule 2. If the rocking chair moves on its own, do not touch it or try to stop it. I stood frozen on the porch, watching it move. The sound was barely audible, a faint creak with each motion, wood against wood, a sound that was probably comforting in daylight but was horrifying in the darkness. I watched it rock for a full minute, maybe longer, my mind trying desperately to find a rational explanation. Wind? No, there was no wind. The air was completely still. Uneven porch? The chair had been motionless when I arrived. Vibration from my footsteps? I was standing still. There was no explanation. The chair rocked. And as I watched it, I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. It was not rocking randomly. It was rocking in a pattern. Fast, fast, slow. Fast, fast, slow. Like a heartbeat. Or like someone tapping their foot impatiently. Like someone waiting for me to do something. I forced myself to step back inside the cabin, keeping my eyes on the chair the entire time. It continued to rock. Fast, fast, slow. Fast, fast, slow. I closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, the rocking stopped. Instantly. No gradual slowing, just immediate stillness. I stood with my back against the door, breathing hard, staring at the equipment on the table. The voice recorder was still recording. The video camera was still filming. Whatever just happened, I had it documented. This was real. This was evidence. But evidence of what? I checked my watch again. 10:17 p.m. I had been in this cabin for 3 hours. It felt like 3 days. I returned to the table and sat down, trying to organize my thoughts. I needed to review what had happened. I needed to think logically. The whispers. Multiple whispers speaking my name. The Bible moving on its own. New writing appearing in the margins. The rocking chair moving with no one in it. These were not subtle phenomena. This was not the kind of haunting where you spend all night hoping to catch a faint anomaly on camera. This was blatant. Aggressive. Intentional. Whatever was here wanted me to know it was here. I pulled my notebook closer and began writing down everything that had happened, documenting times and details while they were still fresh. My handwriting was shaky but readable. Evidence, documentation. That was what I was here for. I was halfway through describing the whispers when I heard something that made my pen stop mid-word. Singing. Faint. Distant, coming from somewhere beneath the cabin. A woman's voice, singing a hymn I did not recognize. The melody was beautiful and haunting, the kind of song that might have been sung in churches 200 years ago. But we were in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else here, and the sound was coming from below me. I stood up slowly and moved to the center of the room, trying to pinpoint the source. The singing grew slightly louder. It was definitely coming from beneath the floorboards. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor. The voice was clearer now. A woman's voice singing in perfect pitch, the words archaic and formal. Come ye sinners, poor and needy, weak and wounded, sick and sore. My skin crawled. That hymn, I knew that hymn. Come ye sinners was one of the hymns that Kate, the Bell Witch, had reportedly sung during the original haunting. Witnesses had described hearing her sing it in the middle of the night, her voice coming from empty rooms and dark corners. The same hymn. The exact same hymn, and then the singing stopped. Complete silence. I lifted my head from the floor and sat back on my heels, listening. Nothing. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 10, 20, 30, and then I heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, barely audible, then growing louder. A woman's laughter, rich and full, not the giggle of a girl, but the laugh of a grown woman who finds something genuinely amusing. And it was coming from directly beneath where I was kneeling. Rule 4. If you hear laughter coming from beneath the floorboards, leave immediately and do not look back. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the floorboards, vibrating up through my knees where they pressed against the wood. It was not joyful laughter. It was mocking, cruel, the kind of laughter that makes it clear you are the joke. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. The laughter continued, spreading now, seeming to come from everywhere at once. From beneath every floorboard in the cabin, from the walls, from the ceiling, surrounding me. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the door. I did not stop to turn off the equipment. I did not stop to pack anything carefully. I just grabbed the bag and ran. I hit the door at full speed, slamming it open, and burst out onto the porch. The laughter followed me. It poured out of the cabin behind me like water spilling into the night air. I leaped off the porch and ran across the clearing, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted for the trail. Behind me, the laughter rose to a crescendo, then suddenly cut off. Silence. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, gasping for breath, and looked back. The cabin stood dark and silent. The door I had left open was now closed. I had not closed it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at that closed door, my chest heaving, my mind racing. Should I go back? I had left my voice recorder, my video camera, hours of footage and audio, evidence that could change everything we thought we knew about the paranormal. But Rule 4 was clear. Leave immediately and do not look back. I had already broken the first part by stopping. If I went back now, if I ignored the warning completely, no, I was not going back. I turned toward the trail and started walking, forcing myself not to run, trying to control my breathing. The forest was darker than I remembered. My flashlight seemed weaker somehow, its beam not penetrating as far into the shadows. Every tree looked the same. Every root and branch seemed placed specifically to trip me. I had walked for what felt like 15 minutes when I realized something was wrong. I should have reached my car by now. The trail was not that long. 20 minutes, maybe 30 at most, from the cabin to the parking area. But I was still surrounded by forest. Still on the trail. Still walking. I stopped and checked my phone. 10:58 p.m. I had left the cabin around 10:30. That meant I had been walking for nearly half an hour. That was impossible. I turned around, shining my flashlight back the way I had come. The trail looked the same in both directions. Just narrow path and endless trees. I tried to orient myself to remember landmarks, but everything looked identical in the darkness. I started walking again, faster now, my breathing quickening with rising panic. 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Still forest, still trail, still no sign of the parking area. And then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The cabin. I was back at the clearing, back at the beginning. I had walked in a complete circle. That was impossible. The trail was linear. It went from the parking area to the cabin in a straight line. There were no branches, no loops, no way to accidentally walk in a circle. But there I was, standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at the cabin I had fled from 40 minutes ago. The door was still closed, but the rocking chair was moving again. Fast, slow. Fast, slow. I backed away from the clearing, my mind refusing to accept what was happening. This was not possible. This could not be real. I turned and ran down the trail again, not caring about making noise, not caring about conserving my flashlight battery. I just ran. The forest blurred around me. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to catch my feet. I ran faster, and then suddenly the trees opened up and I stumbled into the parking area. My car was there, exactly where I had left it, sitting alone in the small clearing. I nearly sobbed with relief. I sprinted to the car, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, the door opened. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and hit the lock button. I sat there for a moment, gasping, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I was safe. And then I heard it. Tapping on the window. I turned slowly. A woman stood outside my car. She was pale, dressed in clothing from another era, her hair hanging long and dark around her face. Her eyes were black, completely black, no white visible at all. And she was smiling. She raised one hand and tapped on the window again with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. Then she leaned closer, her mouth near the glass, and whispered, "You forgot something, Adam." Her voice was muffled by the glass, but I could hear it clearly. The same voice from the cabin, the voice that had whispered my name. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine turned over, roared to life. The woman did not move. She just stood there, smiling, tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. I threw the car into reverse and floored the gas pedal. The car shot backward, tires spinning in the dirt. I cranked the wheel and spun around, then shifted into drive and accelerated down the narrow dirt road. In my rearview mirror, I could see her standing in the clearing, perfectly still, watching me go. And then the mirror was empty. She was gone. I drove faster than was safe on that narrow road, branches scraping against the car, the suspension bouncing over ruts and holes. I did not care. I just needed to get out of there. Finally, blessedly, I reached Old Highway 41. I turned onto the pavement and accelerated, putting distance between myself and that cursed place. I drove for an hour before I felt safe enough to stop. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station just outside Springfield and sat in the parking lot with the engine running and every light in the car turned on. My hands were still shaking. I pulled out my phone. Still no messages, no missed calls. The world had continued on without me while I was trapped in that nightmare. I opened my photo gallery, hoping that maybe, somehow, I had managed to capture something on my phone before leaving. I had not taken any photos, but there were 3 new images in my gallery anyway. The first was a photo of the cabin, taken from inside, showing the main room. The timestamp read 10:43 p.m., right around the time I was running through the forest. The second photo showed the open Bible, a close-up of the page with the underlined verses. But there was more writing in the margins now, more words I had not seen before, scrawled in that same shaky handwriting. "He will return." They always do. The third photo made my stomach drop. It was a selfie, but I had not taken it. It showed me sitting at the table in the cabin, writing in my notebook, completely focused on my work. And standing directly behind me, clearly visible in the frame, was the woman from the parking lot. She was leaning over my shoulder, looking down at what I was writing, her black eyes fixed on the page, and she was smiling. I did not sleep that night. I could not. I drove straight to Nashville, checked into a cheap motel near the airport, and sat on the edge of the bed with every light in the room turned on, staring at those photos on my phone. They were impossible. They should not exist, but they were there, time-stamped and geocoded, proof that something beyond my understanding had happened in that cabin. I tried to tell myself there was a rational explanation. Hacked phone, corrupted data, some kind of elaborate prank, but none of those explanations held up. I had been alone in that forest, completely alone, and I had felt what I felt, heard what I heard, seen what I saw. The Bell Witch was real, and somehow she had followed me out. The next morning, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline, I returned to Adams. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened to me. I went back to the general store where I had stopped the day before. The same old shopkeeper was behind the counter, and when I walked in, he looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pity and knowing. "You went," he said simply. It was not a question. "I did," I admitted. "And you left after dark?" "I had to. Things started happening." He held up a hand, stopping me. "I do not need to know the details. I am just glad you made it back. Not everyone does." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. He looked at them for a long moment, his weathered face expressionless, then handed the phone back. "Delete those," he said quietly. "What? No, this is evidence." This is a curse," he interrupted. "You do not understand. Kate does not just haunt that place. She marks people. She chooses them. And once she chooses you, she does not let go. Those photos are not evidence. They are a connection. Every time you look at them, you are inviting her in. That is insane, is it? He leaned forward. Tell me, son, since you left that cabin, have you heard anything? Anything at all? I opened my mouth to say no, then stopped. I had heard something, just once, right before dawn, when I was finally starting to drift off. A faint whisper so quiet I thought I had imagined it. Adam. The shopkeeper saw the recognition in my face and nodded slowly. She is still with you. She will keep calling until you answer. And once you answer, you will never be free. What do I do? I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. Pray, do not answer. And whatever you do, do not go back. I thanked him and left, my mind reeling. I drove around Adams for a while, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to put as many miles between myself and this town as possible. But another part, the part that had brought me here in the first place, needed to know more. I stopped at a small diner for lunch, and while I was eating, an elderly woman at the next table leaned over. You are the young man who went to the Bell place last night, are you not? She asked quietly. I stared at her. How did you know? Everyone knows. Word travels fast in Adams, especially when it concerns her. Who are you? My name is Margaret. My grandmother knew the Bell family. She lived here during the original haunting, saw things no one should see. She passed down stories, warnings. Can you tell me about them? Margaret glanced around the diner, making sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer. My grandmother said that Kate is not just a ghost. She is something older, something that was here before the Bells, before this town, maybe before people at all. The Bells did not create the haunting. They woke something that should have stayed asleep. What did they do? They disturbed the land, built on it, claimed it as their own. And Kate, or whatever she really is, took offense. She attached herself to John Bell, tormented him, killed him. But it was never just about him. It was about punishment, about teaching a lesson. What lesson? Margaret's eyes were sad. That some places belong to the darkness, and when you trespass there, the darkness remembers. She reached across and touched my hand. Her skin was cold and dry like paper. She chose you, Margaret whispered. I can see it. You have her mark. She will call to you, and you will want to answer. The pull will become unbearable, but you must resist, no matter what she promises, no matter what she offers. Do not answer. Do not return. What happens if I do? She pulled her hand back. Then you become part of the story. Another name whispered in the dark. Another soul that never leaves. The first week after Adams was manageable, I heard the whispers occasionally, usually at night, always when I was alone, but I could ignore them. I threw myself into work, into normal life, into anything that would distract me from thinking about what had happened. But the whispers grew more frequent. By the second week, I was hearing them every night. Always my name. Always the same soft feminine voice. Adam. Sometimes it came from the walls. Sometimes from outside my window. Once I heard it coming from my own closet at 3:17 a.m., and I spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot, too afraid to go back inside. I tried everything. White noise machines, sleeping pills, music, nothing worked. The whispers cut through everything. And then the dream started. I would dream I was back in the cabin, sitting at that table, writing in my notebook. The woman would be there, standing in the corner, watching me with those black eyes, and she would speak. Not the whispered name. Full sentences. She told me things. Secrets about the Bell family. Details about the original haunting that I had never read in any book. Names of witnesses who had never been documented. Events that happened on specific dates. When I woke up, I would write down what I remembered, and when I researched it later, I would discover that the information was accurate, verifiably accurate, things I could not have known. She was feeding me information, but why? By the third week, I was barely sleeping. I looked like hell. Dark circles under my eyes, weight loss, a tremor in my hands that would not go away. My friends were concerned. My coworkers were concerned. I made excuses about stress, about a family situation, about anything other than the truth, because the truth was insane. The truth was that I was being haunted by something I had disturbed in a cabin in Tennessee, and it was systematically breaking down my resistance. I tried everything I could think of to make it stop. I burned sage. I hung iron horseshoes. I had a priest come bless my apartment. Nothing worked. The whispers continued. And then 4 weeks after my visit to Adams, I made a mistake. I was exhausted. Completely, utterly exhausted. I had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in days. I was sitting in my apartment at 2:47 a.m., staring at the wall, listening to the whispers that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. Adam, 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 now over and over, relentless, and I broke. What do you want? I screamed into the darkness. What do you want from me? The whispers stopped. Instant absolute silence, and then clear as day, as if someone was standing directly beside me, her voice. Come back. 2 words. Just 2 words. But they carried such weight, such command, such promise and threat combined, that I actually felt them physically, like a hand gripping my heart. I did not sleep at all that night. The next morning I called in sick to work. I got in my car, and I started driving south. I told myself I was not really going back. I just needed to pass through the area, maybe see the cabin in daylight, maybe prove to myself that it was not as frightening as I remembered. But I knew the truth. I was going back because she had called me, and I had answered. I arrived in Adams just after 1 p.m. The town looked different in daylight, less ominous, more shabby. Just a tiny rural community slowly being forgotten by the world. I did not stop at the general store. I went straight to Old Highway 41, found the unmarked dirt road and drove as far as I could before the road ended. Then I got out and walked. The trail looked different in daylight too. Less sinister. Just an overgrown path through the woods. The same trees. The same vines. But somehow less threatening under the afternoon sun. It took me about 20 minutes to reach the clearing. The cabin stood exactly as I had left it. Dark wood, sagging roof, empty windows. The rocking chair on the porch sat motionless in the still air. I approached slowly, and as I got closer, I noticed something that made my breath catch. The door was open, just like it had been when I first arrived a month ago. Open just enough to be an invitation. I climbed the porch steps and they creaked under my weight, the sound familiar and unsettling. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My voice recorder sat on the table, red light still blinking. Still recording after all this time. The battery somehow not dead. My video camera was still set up on the mantle, still filming. My notebook was open on the table, showing the page where I had written the 4 rules. Nothing had been disturbed. It was as if time had stopped in this cabin the moment I fled. I walked to the table and picked up my voice recorder. I stopped the recording and checked the timestamp. 473 hours of audio, nearly 3 weeks of continuous recording. I should have been excited. This was unprecedented. No one had ever captured this much data from a supposedly haunted location. But all I felt was dread. What had it recorded while I was gone? I rewound to a random point about a week after I had left and pressed play. Static, wind, the settling sounds of an old building, and then faint but distinct her voice. He will come back. I fast-forwarded. A few days later in the recording, Adam will return. Forward again. 1 week before today. Soon. The most recent recording from last night. Tomorrow. She had known. The entire time she had known I would come back. I set the recorder down and looked around the cabin. In daylight it looked almost mundane. Just an old abandoned building. But I could feel it. That same heaviness in the air, that same sense of presence. I am here, I said to the empty room. You called me back. Now what? Silence. I waited, standing in the center of the cabin, my heart pounding. Nothing happened. I answered you, I said louder. I came back. What do you want? Still nothing. I stood there for 5 minutes, 10, 15. The cabin remained silent. No whispers, no movement, just stillness. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the exhaustion and stress had created a delusion so powerful, I had convinced myself it was real. I gathered my equipment, packing it carefully into my backpack. I would take everything home, review all the footage and audio, and try to figure out what had actually happened here. I was zipping up my backpack when I heard it, singing, the same hymn from before, Come Ye Sinners, coming from the back room. I turned slowly. The woman stood in the doorway to the back room. The same woman from the parking lot. The same woman from the photo. Pale skin, long dark hair, black eyes. She smiled at me. Hello, Adam, she said. Her voice was beautiful, melodic, nothing like the harsh whispers I had been hearing for weeks. "I am so glad you came back." I could not move, could not speak. I just stood there staring at her, my mind trying desperately to process what I was seeing. "Do you know why I called you?" she asked, taking a step closer. I shook my head mutely. "Because you are different. Most people who come here are thrill seekers, fools looking for entertainment. But you genuinely wanted to understand. You wanted to know the truth." She smiled wider. "So I will tell you." "Tell me what?" I managed to croak. "The truth about what I am, what this place is, why some souls can never leave." She gestured to the cabin around us. "This land is thin. That is what the old ones used to call it. Thin places, where the veil between worlds is like tissue paper, easy to tear, easy to cross. The Bell family built here because the land was cheap and the soil was good. They did not know, could not have known what slept beneath." "And what slept beneath?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Me," she said simply, "and others like me. We were here long before your kind named this continent, long before your cities and roads and borders. We slept in the deep places, in the caves and the roots of ancient trees, and then your kind woke us." John Bell," she agreed. "He cut down a sacred grove to clear fields for his crops. He built his house over a cave mouth that should never have been sealed. He disturbed the sleep of something that should have remained sleeping. So I taught him what it means to trespass. You killed him." "I punished him," she corrected. "There is a difference. I gave him fair warning. Many warnings. He ignored them. So yes, I ended his life. And I would do it again." She moved closer, and I could see now that she was not quite solid. Her edges were blurred, as if she were slightly out of focus with reality. "But you," she continued, "you intrigued me. You broke my rules. You should have left when I laughed from below. But you came back. Despite everything I did to terrify you, to warn you, to drive you away, you came back. You called me," I said. "Yes, but you answered. That was your choice." She was right in front of me now, close enough to touch. "I will offer you something few others have received," she said softly. "A choice. You can leave now. Take your equipment, return to your life. I will stop calling you. I will release my mark. You will never hear from me again." "And the other choice?" Her smile was sad. "You stay. You learn. You become a keeper of stories, a bridge between worlds. You will see things that would shatter most minds. You will know truths that historians have spent lifetimes seeking. But you will also carry a burden, because knowledge of the thin places changes you. And once changed, you can never truly go home." I stared at her, my mind racing. This was insane. I should run. I should take the first option and never look back. But I knew I would not. I had spent my entire adult life seeking the truth behind legends, and here it was standing in front of me, offering to tell me everything. "If I stay," I said slowly, "what happens?" "You learn," she said. "And then you decide if the world is ready to know what you have learned." I thought about the whispers that had haunted me for weeks, the sleepless nights, the terror. And I thought about the questions that had driven me to this place, the need to understand, the hunger for truth. "I will stay," I said. She smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in it. "Then sit, Adam, and I will tell you the story that history forgot." I stayed in that cabin for 3 days. Kate, or whatever she truly was, told me things that rewrote everything I thought I knew about American history, about the supernatural, about the very nature of reality itself. She showed me things in the cave beneath the cabin that no human had seen in centuries. She taught me the old languages that were spoken before English, before French, before any European tongue touched this soil. And then on the 3rd day she released me. "Go," she said. "Tell the story or do not. That is your burden now." I gathered my equipment and left the cabin. As I walked back down the trail, I looked back once. She stood on the porch watching me go, and then she was gone. I returned home, and for the first time in weeks, the whispers were silent. My sleep was dreamless. The mark, whatever it had been, was lifted, but she was right about one thing. I had been changed. I reviewed all the footage, all the audio, and I found hundreds of hours of evidence. Voices speaking when the cabin was empty, shadows moving with no source, the woman herself appearing and disappearing, always watching. But I have not published it. I have not shared it with the world, because I learned something in that cabin that took me 3 days to fully understand. Some truths are not meant for everyone. Some knowledge is a burden, not a gift. And some legends exist to protect us from things we are not ready to comprehend. The Bell Witch is real. I know this with absolute certainty. But she is not what the historians think. She is not what the paranormal investigators believe. She is older, stranger, more complex than any ghost story can contain. And she is not alone. There are thin places all over this country, all over the world, places where things that should not exist still do, places where the old rules still apply. And there are people like me now who know about them, who carry the stories, who stand watch. I still visit Adam sometimes. I walk the trail to the cabin, though I do not go inside anymore. I have learned everything Kate wanted to teach me. Now it is up to me to decide what to do with that knowledge. But I will tell you this. If you ever find yourself in Adams, Tennessee, and someone warns you not to go to the Bell property after dark, listen to them. If you hear your name whispered in the darkness, do not answer. If you see a rocking chair moving on its own, walk away. If you find an open Bible on a chair, leave it closed. Because the rules are not superstition, they are survival. The Bell Witch taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this. When the dark says your name, never answer. Unless you are prepared for what comes next. So here I am sharing this story with you. Some of you will believe it, some will not. And that is okay. I am not trying to convince you. I am simply warning you. The thin places exist. The old things still sleep in the deep. And sometimes, if you are very unlucky or very lucky, depending on your perspective, you will stumble across them. And when you do, remember the rules. Remember that some legends are not entertainment. They are instructions for staying alive. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with me in the darkness and hearing what I experienced. If this story affected you, if it made you think twice about the shadows in your own home, then hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories from the edges of reality. And tell me in the comments, do you believe in the Bell Witch? Have you ever experienced something you could not explain? Have you ever heard your name whispered by something that should not know it? Share your stories. Because maybe, just maybe, you are not alone. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, but most importantly, stay aware. Because in the thin places, in the dark corners where the old things sleep, someone or something is always listening. And sometimes they whisper back.